What's going on, guys? It is MurderInc here, back with another Raid Shadow Legends video, and today we're going to be talking about the most important part of the entire game. That's going to come down to gear sets. Gear, you cannot do anything in your account without gear. You can have every legendary you want in the world, but if the gear isn't good, you're not going to get anything done. So what this video is going to do, it's going to tell you the best sets per where you are in the game, meaning early game, mid game, late game, and finally end game. Now, one major disclaimer that I do have to make is, while this is going to be the best sets for the progression you are currently at in the game, there is always going to be one exception for broken sets, and that's going to be anytime you get a piece that has ridiculous triple rolls, even double rolls, quad rolls. You can always get those pieces. They can be above and beyond what you would expect from a piece of gear, so those will always trump any gear set in the game, unless it's a very specific 4-set bonus that you do need to complete certain content in this game. So with that being said, make sure you watch all the way to the end, because there's a lot of points that I'm going to make throughout this video. If you don't see a gear set that you think should be there for sure, you're probably going to hear about it later and the exact reason as to why you don't see that piece. So with all of that said, let's go ahead and start with early game. Now, early game is a really easy one. Lifesteal, speed, perception, accuracy. Those are going to be the 4 best sets, hands down, no competition, for the early game, based on how easy they are to get, how easy they are to farm, and the frequency that you will see these pieces drop for you as a player. Early game is probably going to be the lightest and quickest topic of them all, because there's really not much to talk about here. And in case you are curious as to why accuracy and perception are on this list, I know a lot of people would probably assume it's just lifesteal and speed. The amount of accuracy you get from just that set bonus being 40 is gigantic for all progression early game, and it's such a powerful 4-piece bonus with that in mind. Now, if you consider something like life, defense, that percentage bonus isn't going to impact your account a lot, because your champion stats are going to be so low. Flat stats actually have a really good chance of becoming better than percentage stats for a lot of your champions early on. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and move straight on into the mid game. Now, for mid game, this is where clan boss starts to become more appealing, so lifesteal or stalwart gear depending on the type of champions you have. If you have Grush the Mangler, you can get away with stalwart. If you have other good healers, you don't need lifesteal gear. Speed gear is always going to be up there. Perception, accuracy gear, once again, the same 4 sets with the additional stalwart that we saw in early game, but now we're going to add crit rate, because crit capping your champions is mandatory starting from mid game if you really want to see some progression. Resilience gear also makes it onto the list here, because this is the point where percentages start making a huge difference, and you really do start to struggle with survivability a lot in the mid game, more so than any other place in this entire game. So with that being said, stun set is going to be the first CC type set to be added to this list here. Stun is really good overall, and it pairs very well with champions like Seal of the Drakes that you will get in the mid game. So that in itself, being a champion that every player is going to get, shoots this up to the top of the list for sure. And finally, life, because as we all know, defensive layering and basic defense for your champion, the best survival stat to stack on your champion is going to be life. Defense definitely takes a secondary measure there, so life set is going to be the top. And now here's where the first point is going to come into play that is going to be applied from now on through the rest of the video. Anywhere you see the sets speed or life, it is always going to apply to the divine version as well. I didn't forget about it. I know it does exist. It's not as common. It's a bit harder to get for most players since you cannot farm it as a drop. So whenever I say speed gear, divine speed will apply. Whenever I say life gear, divine life will also apply there. Now that we've covered mid game, let's go ahead and move on into the late game here. You're going to see some of the same and some new sets. We have speed, perception, lifesteal or stalwart depending on your clan boss team. Stun gear once again becomes relevant. Now we're introduced to savage gear, being the best damage dealing set in the entire game. Immunity gear, which is incredible for arena, and it helps position you for a really good spot when moving on to speed farming teams. Immunity is key set for dungeon speed clearing teams when you have a champion like Seer. The next set we have is shield. Shield set is fantastic for all late game progression. The amount of value you can get from a shield set is absolutely incredible. And then finally, the most broken set in the game, swift parry. So late game is the first point in the game where you really have to start considering every single aspect of the game: PvP, PvE, all the content you can think of. That's really where everything kind of pops out in late game and where you're going to start seeing these sets. Now for our second crucial point that I do have to mention here, you might be confused, why are some of these sets not appearing here? And you're really going to see this when I move on to the end game. However, it has to be mentioned during the late game. The reason why you aren't seeing any clan boss gear sets and why you aren't seeing any Doom Tower gear sets is because it's so hard to farm the proper level you need of those gear sets at this point in time of the game. It's just too hard. To say to a late game player, you have to be farming hard consistently, you're 1 keying or 2 keying Ultra Nightmare, getting that top chest every single day. Late game is kind of that transition into being able to do that. So I'm not listing it anywhere else. Of course, all of those sets are way better than anything I've mentioned so far, but it's not realistic for anyone unless they're spending a ton of money to have access to these gear sets this early on into the game. And with that being said, that moves us on to end game. What are the best sets for end game players in Raid Shadow Legends? And that's going to be speed, perception, immunity, savage, swift parry, and crit damage. And now we add clan boss sets because it's very realistic and reasonable to expect all of these players, if you reach the end game level, to have been farming this for a very long time. So our mortal set, rule set, among the best sets in the entire game, the Doom Tower sets of Untouchable, the new savage gear that's going to be coming out, the new resistance gear that's going to be coming out. Have to mention them, even though they're not currently in the game now. They probably will be, as a lot of people are continuing to watch this video, so I have to mention them and be responsible in that nature, so no one thinks they're terrible sets. So with that being said, it's pretty clear to see what the top sets are for each early, mid, late, and end game. Now we go to the niche honorable mentions. Now this is a section where things can change. You could be seeing this list and say, Murder, none of this applies to me. That 100% is because tier lists in this game don't work. That is why I did not present this to you as a tier list saying this gear set's S tier, this one's A tier. It just doesn't work that way. Raid Shadow Legends is way too customizable to have any type of tier list. You can say it can give you a general idea. That's exactly what I'm doing here. I'm giving you a general idea, but I'm not saying of the good options which ones are better and which ones are worse, because it's going to be different from an account to an account basis, and that's a really important point there. So moving on to the niche honorable mentions, we have Taunting Gear, Regeneration, Frenzy, Daze, Toxic, Fury, Relentless, Resistance, Deflection, and Shield, also outside of the late game application. So what does it mean when I say niche honorable mentions? Taunting Gear and Daze Gear fall into the same boat as when we first saw Stun Gear in the mid game. You can absolutely have a lot of success using these sets or some type of CC. However, you have to remember that Daze is very niche because you need it on an extremely fast champion, so the enemy is asleep while its turn meter is full, and then it wakes up after that, losing its full turn. It's really hard to pull off in progression. It requires lots of speed tuning. That's why it's best used on someone like Hegemon, and I would never put Daze being an amazing gear set because it is amazing for just one champion, being Hegemon. But that goes to show you that if you have a Hegemon, if it for some reason you're insanely lucky and you pull it in the early game, the Daze set automatically shoots to among the top of the list for all arena gameplay. The same thing can be said with Taunting. Taunting is more of a later game and end game gear set for the simple fact that most champions that have provokes in their kit, they have some way to mitigate the incoming damage they're going to take from provoking so many targets. Adding a taunting set to a champion, believe it or not, has a very negative effect if you don't gear that champion properly. So if you put a taunting champion on a champion you don't give enough survivability to, you can end up dying to the A1s based on how geared your opponent is or what type of content you're using in, like the Doom Tower. Your champion that taunted can end up getting one shot. It removes the provoke buff from everyone it's currently on, and it's a useless set. However, if you're more advanced in the game, you know this, so you can properly use taunting in incredible ways. Regeneration set, it's probably the go-to solo dungeon farming set for pretty much every single champion. That's why it's on here. Frenzy set, rather hard to use but has some really cool interactions in the arena. Toxic and Fury gear is more gated towards unkillable teams. Not everybody has unkillable teams, so I cannot put this on the list for being a best set because it has to apply to, if not everybody, the majority of the people watching and the player base as well. Relentless gear, once again, it's a bit of an RNG set. I would never put an RNG set above any other set that I do have on this list. Per the progression levels that you saw, it is very valuable in unkillable teams, once again, more specific ones, but that is why this is kept as a niche honorable mention. Next we have resistance. Resistance is a very hard stat to gear. It's definitely more of an end game, late game strategy. Late game might even be pushing it a little bit because resistance is so easy to overcome with things like increased accuracy. However, if used properly, you can definitely use it for some really critical and very powerful progression. Deflection set, definitely an end game niche honorable mention. It can have amazing application in the arena, or you just don't have the champions to really make it work, so it won't be good for your account at all. The same thing applies with shield set and everywhere outside of late game where I did mention it. If you happen to get really good shield set pieces and have a good champion with high base HP, shield set is going to be a fantastic set. However, it's very champion dependent and specific, whereas these other gear sets that I mentioned don't have any requirements as far as what champions you do in fact have. Alright guys, that's going to conclude my video today on the best gear sets you could possibly use per your stage of progression. Let me know what you guys think. What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? What sets have you used to help you get through this game? What's been the most impactful set you could think of in this game that pretty much changed your whole game experience once you got that amazing roll while rolling up gear? Because as we all know, it takes a ridiculous amount of silver to get the gear you want. When you finally do, man, does it feel really, really good. As always, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and I will see you all in my next video.